In an isolated area of Reiki, Scotland, there was the dwelling of a farmer named Andrew Mackie. Andrew and his family lived there for a long time, until a mysterious and dangerous incident turned the peaceful place uninhabitable. It all started on an apparently normal morning at the end of February 1669. Andrew went out to start his daily chores. He had already prepared food for the pigs and was carrying an iron bucket in each hand. However, he had to drop the buckets when he noticed that his cattle were loose on his land. Although he was sure they were locked up the night before, somehow, the animals managed to get loose during the night. For Andrew, it was strange that all the animals got loose at the same time, but he chose to believe that the ties were defective or that the knot was not tight enough. Reluctantly, Andrew gathered all the scattered cattle on the farm and, to ensure that this did not happen again, used thicker ties and tightened them as much as he could. However, the next morning, he came across the same scene. All the cattle had escaped and scattered again around the farm. It seemed like a bad joke, but it quickly turned into something much more dangerous and strange. One early morning, while the whole family was sleeping, someone set fire to a large pile of hay in the middle of the main residence. As if a pile of decomposing plant material wasn't unpleasant enough, the intruder decided to take harassment of the Mackie family to an even higher level. Fortunately, they managed to put out the fire before anyone got hurt and the house did not suffer major damage. In March, the Mackies received a new wave of attacks from which they could not escape this time. They woke up in the early hours with the noise of glass breaking and something falling on the wooden kitchen floor, then another and another. In a matter of seconds, dozens of stones were thrown at the house, breaking windows. To throw such a quantity of stones in such a short time would require a crowd of people, but Andrew checked that there was not a single soul outside. In early April, the minister and some other religious people held an all-night prayer vigil, but were frequently interrupted by stones hitting both ministers and Mackie family members. The men could not stop the phenomenon, and stone attacks only worsened, practically making prayer on the farm impossible. That's when Andrew Mackie asked for help from local Reverend Alexander Del Fark. The Reverend visited several days later and discussed with the family what could be causing this strange series of supernatural events. Del Fark himself revealed to Andrew that years before his family arrived at that farm, it was inhabited by the Magnate family. The patriarch of Magnate endured an extensive series of misfortunes with this place. In addition to losing several crops, he was tormented by several diseases that did not respond to any treatment. Mr. Magnate was convinced that his farm was cursed. The Reverend inspected it but found nothing strange. However, when he was about to leave, a rain of stones began against his house and family. The Reverend said he would return on Sunday for group prayer in hopes of driving away whatever malevolent specter or entity was causing all this. When Reverend Alexander returned in mid-prayer, he was surprised by a rain of stones that seemed to sprout from nowhere. The Reverend became fully convinced that his family was under attack from an evil entity and promised to return in a few days with better resources to face it. As promised, he returned and began with a prayer. However, as expected, he was again attacked with stones. But this time, the evil entity took things to a new level. After a loud snap, the Reverend writhed in pain. He said it felt like a large, heavy stick was hitting him in the back. Although no one present could see the weapon, the Mackies kept hearing the impacts against Alexander's body over and over again. The Reverend's efforts to exorcise the house were in vain, and he ended up seriously injured. This was more than a moral victory for whatever was behind the attacks on the farm. It meant that no one else wanted to get involved in the problem. The next few days were marked by a frenzy of violence orchestrated by the supernatural entity. Any neighbor who tried to visit the Mackies was immediately repelled by a rain of stones or by the strange sensation of being hit with a wooden stick. And as the problem grew larger, the Mackies were running out of options. On one of their last days at home, Mrs. Mackie noticed a loose stone slab next to the main door. Upon removing it, she found small fragments of bone, flesh, and some blood. Everything was wrapped in an old crumpled paper. The next day, the main house caught fire and the Mackies, along with their neighbors, did their best to control it. 3 days later, a community group gathered in the stable to hold a group prayer. In the middle of that prayer, they observed a black cloud in one corner. After many minutes of prayer, that black cloud dispersed, and as it withdrew, it said goodbye with one last act of terror by setting fire to the sheep stable. By this point, the farm phenomenon had already caused much damage. The main house had been burned down to its foundations, and the Mackies had to move out. Undoubtedly, the Mackie farm phenomenon is one of the most powerful supernatural manifestations ever recorded. Not only did it terrorize the Mackies for months, but it resisted attacks from experts and finally destroyed a family's home and their only means of livelihood. The only thing left on Mackie's farm is a tree that grew amidst destruction. What could be living in this tree? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this video with those who like supernatural stories.